I'm Vin.
I'm Sori.
And this is Thrice.
Words in the Water for big homie Ayo.
Ayo again. For timely topical political commentary, you can hit us up in Middle America with Vin and Sori. Probably by the time you're watching this, I think we're going to release this around 7, maybe 8 o'clock. And then after that, we'll be doing a fireside, inshallah. We'll see. There are multiple ways to get your song reviewed, dear listener. My favorite way is the community option. $1 the gate gets you in at Patreon, where you meet the amazing Kellen Dross. You meet the amazing... Kellen Dross always has thoughtful comments when he puts on the comment stream. 95% of it is, you're an idiot, Vin, but they're all very thoughtful. That's the only thing he's wrong about. In the entire time I've talked to him, is that I'm not an idiot. So you meet Kellen Dross, you meet all these wonderful people in the village.
Is Kellen Dross or Kai the one that does the art?
Kai.
Pictures. Okay.
Kellen Dross's art is how he uses words.
Okay.
Okay, so you meet all those wonderful people. They recruit you. You pool your points together. There's different tiers. You get a shirt on this one. You get a this on this one. You get to do a song review with us in one of them. But $1 the gate gets you in. You pool your points together, and then you decide. It helps us decide what songs that we do. Now, if you're a filthy capitalist, isolationist like Sori, and you don't want to work with a team, all you have to do is, Ayo is different. I'm not going to say Ayo is a filthy anything, because he's my buddy. $125 gets you straight to the head of the line. You get to cut, skip, jump everybody like on Disney World. And you do that 3 times, you get bumped down to the $75 rate, which
right onto the short list.
He's at the $75 rate, isn't he? He should be. Don't send him all money. And then you get a lifetime subscription to the VIP Backstage Pass for the website.
And actually, some people have been asking, like, can you do more than one song in a month? Yes, you can. However many songs you pay for, that's how many you get. So we have a couple of Thrice songs.
Just keep track, because there's a couple people that have sent $125 when they're down at the $75 rate. Remember, after you've done 3, it goes down to the $75 rate. So stop sending us money.
Yeah, sometimes we catch it, but it's better if you keep your eye out for it.
Sori's a filthy capitalist.
That's not true. Multiple people know that I've caught it with them, but you're just hell-bent on seeing me in a negative light, and I understand that.
Let's go. Thrice, Words in the Water.
Ready?
Go! That's deep.
Wow.
That's one of those.
That's a good one. Oh.
That's one of those ones where you have to be a Christian to know what the heck he's doing. You know what I mean? So this is it combines some elements from Ezekiel and Revelation and yada yada yada.
Wow.
But go ahead. You seem pretty affected by the song.
Well, yeah, because so when the song was going, I'm like, I'm just gonna pull up the lyrics. Oh, you hear baby's awake, and we sent all the kids outside.
Calamity.
Oh, that's right. They have a phone. Okay, so when it started, standing knee deep in cold water, swiftly moving, somehow I knew I'd lost something. I didn't know where we were going in the song because I always like kind of try to like match the song to something that I can relate to. And I do that. Like, I like standing in cold water and watching it move really fast and like kind of feeling the things that you feel when you're in that situation. And then it says, wading waist deep, I saw a book there in the river waiting for me to find it. And I was like, I wonder what that book is. I tried to read it, neck deep, treading water, but the tide, it pulled me out to sea. So I thought like, wait. I thought maybe it was the Bible that it was being talked about, but then I didn't understand why he wasn't able to read it. And then he got pulled out to sea. Then it says, then with water in my eyes, the words began to rise from their place. They were beautiful and dread. And I reached for them and fed on every phrase. And when it hit that part, I'm like, okay, it is talking about the Bible. Yeah. And it like made me just want to go and just sit down and read the Bible.
Yeah.
Because I think that if you don't have the experience with the Bible, then it doesn't make any sense, kind of like you said, what we're saying.
Yeah.
But like there is something like when you really connect with the words, and sometimes it's not even written poetically, but it hits your heart like poetry.
100%.
And so like when I was hearing this song, I was like, just like thinking about the Bible, and I still wasn't sure that's what they were talking about. But then it said they were honey on my lips, and there is a verse that talks about
it's
that
Ezekiel
it's
3.
or,
it says, Ezekiel 3, Son of man, eat whatever you find
eat.
there. Eat this scroll and go speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. And he said to me, Son of man, feed your belly on this scroll that I give you to fill your stomach with it. Then I ate it, and it was in my mouth as sweet as honey. Okay, so when he eats the word, it's as sweet as honey, but then later he says it becomes bitter to him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing that happened in Revelation with John, where he eats it and it was sweet, but then when it hit his stomach, it was
bitter.
Bitter.
And then he says, but then a bitter twist in my side, and I was like thinking about when you're in the water and you get a cramp. And so I'm like, okay, so he was like feeding on it, but then he ends up like, the man's got a cramp. I actually hadn't thought of that verse yet where it talked about like, where it turns bitter. And then he says, I knew they'd lay me in my grave. Is there no one who can save me? I cried. So I was like, well, there is someone that can save him. That's Jesus. He needs Jesus to come save him.
Yeah.
But then it says, sinking down deep through the water, heavy silence, shadows stirring in the gloom, what things lay sleeping down deep in the darkness woke then to find me in that tomb. When he said that it found him in his tomb, then I said, oh, so maybe this water that he's in was baptism. And so that's why he finds himself in a tomb.
Yeah.
But so I still wasn't like completely clear where we were going. And then when he said, then he repeats the chorus again. He says, and when I lost all hope to look, someone took that heavy book from my hands. And I knew we were talking about the Bible, and like because I've been a Christian all my life, there was a lot of emphasis put on doing the right thing all the time and like being a certain thing for everybody around you. And that's something that I've really had to, it's really been challenging for me for the past few years. Really since you started challenging me years ago with it. And then obviously it's intensified through like the idea of like putting forth your true self rather than, so like the Bible to me like was like a lot of people say, like a bunch of rules. Mm-hmm. And so he says, someone took that heavy book from my hands. All its weight they set aside after they had satisfied its demands. So they didn't just take the Bible from him. Obviously, it's talking about what Jesus did on the cross and how Jesus, like, it said that he fulfilled the law and like he took care of it for us and stuff. But like, I think all of that, like, just growing up with all this pressure to be like a perfect person all the time, and even now at my age, like, I'm 35 years old and I still have a hard time not like with the idea that I'm not a perfect person. And I think that when I was younger, I was able to like delude myself that I was more perfect than I actually was, because there wasn't really a whole lot of trouble necessarily to get into, and I was doing all the right things and stuff. And then, you know, obviously if you go through a divorce in a church, you're not going to be looked at as a perfect person. And so that was like a big thing. And then, you know, we ended up getting married, and there was so many things that were happening at the same time. And even, you know, when you're blending families and you're trying to, you know, balance yourself between all the kids, and, you know, you have the children that you birthed yourself, and then you're trying to, you know, love everybody the same so nobody feels left out. It's just all of this pressure that I just can't live up to. But like, when I heard this, it was like, like, I know he's not talking about necessarily that type of thing, but that is included in it. That, you know, there is so many demands that I place on myself because I want to be a certain type of person. But the idea that Jesus would take that all away and then just like, you know, and then he says, I felt white and black reverse. I really liked that, because to me it was like what he knew and what he believed and he always thought. Like, he saw that flip, and in the moment that it flipped, he realized, wait a minute, what I thought was truth wasn't the truth. This is truth. And the lifting of a curse from my heart, which is good too, because I think that sometimes that's where we feel a lot of the weight of the curse. I don't even think necessarily that people know that it's the weight of the curse, which I'm sure you're going to get into more, but like, there is a curse that's on every single human being from the moment that we're born. And I think that you hear it sometimes in the lyrical content of the songs and the stuff that people say, but they don't necessarily know what it is. It's just like, you know, this. But anyway, so then like, one receiving sight, I beheld a brilliant light in the dark. And that was like, I don't know, like, I lost it when I got to the chorus 2 part. I'm like, oh my gosh. Because then I was like, okay, it's definitely, you know, this is definitely Jesus saving that person from...
Well, it's interesting. You have a singular noun, when someone took that heavy book from my hands. And then it says, all its weight they set aside after they had satisfied its demands. So there's a one here, someone.
Yeah.
And then there's a plurality here, they.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's even better.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a very Pauline, and I'm reading some NT right now, so people are like, I thought you were reading Marx. I am! I'm also reading some NT right now. And this is very complex Pauline theology. So for example, when he talks about, you know, the book, and somebody took the book from him, the heavy book, I don't think the heavy book is the Bible. I think the heavy book is the religious impulse to read the Bible outside of grace. So grace is this idea that you function as a son or daughter of God, and you do things, you do the right thing out of gratitude and love to your Father, not because you're trying to keep certain rules. But a person prior to their conversion is going to look at the Bible as a list of these rules that you have to do, and if you don't do them,
even
you're
after
a
I was
person.
a Christian, I still saw it. I mean, I was always a Christian, and I saw it that way.
Right.
And so, it was heavy, and I would read my Bible because it was the right thing to do.
Right.
Not because I was, you know, searching for the one true God in those words. It was...
Right, I always kind of cringe. People say the Bible is a guidebook to life. Like, it is that, and it isn't. It's also a guidebook to death. Because there's a part of you that does need to die, and that's a constant theme throughout the Old and the New Testament. There's a reason Jesus says you have to be born again. And the reason you have to be born again is because you have to die. There's a part of you that has to die, and another part of you that has to get reborn. And so Paul talks about this, like the guy that wrote the majority of the New Testament and is responsible for Christianity in the Western world, almost single-handedly, says this, because Paul was a mega religious guy. He says, and it was a really, really interesting statement in verse 9 in Romans chapter 7. Once I was alive apart from the law, that is his own self-understanding. He was alive in the sense that he felt that he was good, he felt he was a decent person, I'm a good dude, so I'm alive. But then he says, but when the commandment came, sin sprang to life and I died. So I discovered the very commandment that was meant to bring life actually brought death. For sin, seizing the opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. So here, when he talks about ending up in a tomb and all the rest of it, it says, water in my eyes, the words began to rise from their place. They were beautiful and dread. I reached for them and fed on each phrase. They were honey on my lips, but then a bitter taste in my side. I knew they'd lie me in my grave. So, and then he ends up saying, is there no one can save me? Which follows very nicely with Romans 7, where he says,
who shall deliver me from this body?
Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? So he's not saying that the law is bad. What he's saying is that the law killed him because it destroyed, it killed his own perception of himself. A lot of us believe that we're better than we actually are. And there's a lot of things that expose what we actually are, whether it's circumstances or situation. Like I was in a situation a couple days ago with a good friend of mine, and we got into a conflict, and I was like, you got tested once and look at you, and he said, well, look at you. So circumstances will show you where you actually are. A lot of us have a perception of ourselves that's usually self-serving and delusional. And so, a preacher can tell you all day, you're a sinner, blah, 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 blah. But when you start opening the Bible, just reading the Sermon on the Mount, the standard of living that Jesus has to the Sermon on the Mount, most people don't realize that they would probably have done better in an Old Testament moral economy than the New Testament one, because in the Old Testament one, don't commit adultery. Then Jesus shows up and says, don't look at a woman with lust in your heart. Old Testament says, don't kill anybody. Jesus says, if you're angry at your brother without good reason, you've murdered him in your heart. So it's all the little loopholes that you can use when you're focusing on the letter of the law. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount completely destroys that.
Right.
And I had a friend of mine that was God goes after people for thought crime. And I said, that's true. In a human context, punishing someone for thought crime is horrible and dangerous because as human beings, we have limited knowledge.
Exactly.
And we don't know what the person was actually thinking.
It seems obvious to us sometimes, but it doesn't necessarily mean right.
Correct. And here's the thing. A lot of people want to just whittle down morality to what you do or don't do in the world. A lot of people, that's a blind spot. They don't really believe that a thought life should be criminalized. And I always say, okay, so a person's thought life has no moral implications whatsoever. So if there is a guy who constantly fantasizes in his mind about doing certain acts with children, would you say he's a good or a bad person? Now, most people in their honest moments would say, well, no, that's a bad person. A dude who is constantly thinking about doing horrific things to children, in that context, even if he doesn't do it, we would still say he's a bad guy for fantasizing and enjoying doing things to children in his mind. And so, but we don't have God doesn't put that in our arena because we're flawed human beings. So as far as jurisprudence goes, you only get attacked for what you do you only get punished for what you do in the real world. But if there was somebody who knew you perfectly and who could judge you perfectly, then you would absolutely be in play for thought crime, which is really the realm that Jesus operates in, because that's where your heart, that's the seat of your actual person. It's the invisible side of you.
Right.
That is absolutely real. That is absolutely also corrupt. And so the Sermon on the Mount just destroy. If you read it honestly and properly, it should kill any hope you have of getting to God on your righteousness ever. And so, the idea is that the law is designed to kill you, and then the gospel is designed to resurrect you. Right? Like, the reason the good news is because there was bad news that preceded it, is the idea. And so, a lot of people, I think our community has a much better head start at this than like a Christian community would. Because in the Christian community, you're raised with this crazy idea that, you just good and we're better than everybody, and look at those gays over there and look at those people over there, and we're just so good and we're better and we're going to get raptured out of here in 5 years because God can't stand to have us in this horrible planet. I just read a post from somebody a couple hours ago. And it's like, so Christians, people who grew up in Christian environments need to be evangelized as much as, atheists or whatever. As a matter of fact, Jonathan Edwards and those guys, during the Great Awakening, they were not going after atheists and quote unquote savages. They were going after people in the church who did not understand what the good news of the gospel was, and didn't understand what we, like you were talking about. When I was a kid reading the Bible, it's just because I loved Moses and I loved God and I just wanted to hang out with him, and I pretty much co-signed everything God did in the Old Testament except for not letting Moses into the Promised Land. I had a real problem with that. But I never thought that Moses was this great, honest, holy guy. Like, he killed that Egyptian. He lost his temper. I looked at him like, oh, okay, yeah. Like, if I was in this situation, he was like I never thought of him as like, he's a good person, he's following the rules. I just thought of him as God was like, all right, I can work with that. And he had a very, it says Moses spoke with God face to face as a man speaks to his friend, Deuteronomy 32, and a bunch of other passages where it speaks of Moses' relationship with God. And that was a big thing that I loved about Moses, was because he had this friendship with God, and he was so real and he was so honest, and he was not very good at keeping the rules that he was writing about. And so I never interpreted that as, oh, so if I, be like Moses and keep all the rules. I was like, be like Moses and be honest with God and be mad and tell God to leave you alone and tell God you're happy when you're happy. And, that's kind of how I interpreted it. But that's because God was very, very gracious to me. Most people interpreted the Old Testament, especially Moses, as these are people that you need to follow their example because they're very, very good people, and you can be a good person too if you read this. And to me, it's a complete misunderstanding of what's happening. John Bunyan wrote something really, really awesome. I actually had an atheist friend say something like this to me, and I never got back to him. I'll probably shoot a video for him or something. But so John Bunyan wrote, "Run, John, run, the law commands, but gives us neither feet nor hands.
Oh.
Far better news the gospel brings, it bids us fly and gives us wings." So
really good.
So so a lot of people are stuck on the first half, right? Like, run, run, run. And a lot of people are saying, well, yeah, the guy was like, God's giving us all these commands, but then he says we're born in sin, so none of us can get to heaven. This is a terrible plan. And that's because he only read the first half of that. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then that's how a lot of people view their relationship with God or the goal of Christianity. And that's why people say Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, they're all saying the same thing. Jesus is saying something totally radical from Buddha or Muhammad. Jesus is saying you cannot do that, whether it's attain enlightenment or whether it's attain Jannat al-Firdaus. You can't do it. And you will never be able to do it. And I'm the one that's going to live this life for you. And then you get all my goodness on credit. And you get all my enlightenment on credit. And you get my Jannah on credit. That's something radically different from what Buddha or Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was saying. It's just, so I know when people say, oh, they're basically saying the same thing. I go, okay, they really don't understand what's happening here. Like, yes, the Sermon on the Mount is to me the constitution of the New World. I talk all the time about the New World, and I believe wholeheartedly that the Sermon on the Mount has very practical, utilitarian implications for how to live in the world. And whether or not you're a Christian, I think people are going to eventually see the logic behind it. Oh, maybe we should stop the cycle of violence. Maybe we should get out of Afghanistan. Maybe we shouldn't kill each other wholesale. But they killed us wholesale. Right. But if we go and kill them wholesale, they're going to come back and kill us wholesale. So how about we just turn the other cheek and let that and cut our losses? So I do believe that. But Jesus made it very, very clear that the key into the kingdom, into the new world, is being born again, which is through the power of the Holy Spirit, being adopted, which talks about our relationship to the Father, and trusting in Jesus for all our goodness. And that's why there's that singular someone took that heavy book from my hands, and then there's that plural they, because in Christian theology, the entire Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is engaged in saving us from ourselves. Right. And saving the world from humanity. and saving humanity from the just, righteous wrath of God. So I really caught that at the end, you know. So the book is, I interpret that as reading the Bible through the lens of the treadmill, where you're always working, you're always trying to make the grade, you're always trying to be good enough, you're always trying to attain some standard of goodness, and you're always trying to measure up. And Jesus is the only person from a Christian perspective that is able to actually measure up, able to actually reach enlightenment, able to do all that. And then your job is simply to look to him and say, okay, all my enlightenment, all my goodness is in Jesus. I'm now adopted as a child or a son or a daughter to the Father, and now the Holy Spirit's going to work in me and turn me more and more and more into Big Brother Jesus as the years go on, and I'm going to slip and I'm going to fall, I'm going to run into friends, and he's going to put me into conflict and expose parts of me that are not yet like Christ, and then I'm going to, we're going to do it again, and I am improving as a person, not in order to attain enlightenment, because I have all of it in Jesus, not in order to attain righteousness, because I have it all in Jesus, but because when you are born again into God's family, it's kind of like the baby, like when he was first born, he was kind of, but then as he's growing, people go, oh, I see Vin there. Or I see, as you grow as a child, you take on more characteristics of your father. And, in the natural world, nature's doing that, and genetics are doing that. In the spiritual world, the Holy Spirit does that, and he makes you look more and more like Jesus. And so if I have a conflict with a very valuable friend of mine, like I did a couple days ago, I'm not... You can't be a sociopath and say, well, all my righteousness is in Jesus. Like, you have to apologize to your friend. So I say, hey, man, I'm sorry, but I don't sit there and beat myself up. I go crazy. I'm a terrible Christian witness, blah, blah, blah. God's like, look at that, Vincent. You're not, and obviously, you're a weakness of mine or whatever. And so it's like, it's one of those things where, you have to grow as a Christian. And I go, okay, so God's like making it clear, like this is a problem. This is, how could you have handled this more like Jesus? And then I just go, yup. And I say, inshallah, I get tested again, I'll remember this incident and go on, and I don't have any guilt about it. My friend already forgave me, he apologized to me, I already forgave him, we're done, and we're talking about doing other stuff. And that's how the life is supposed to work. But you've got to have that security that you're a son. And that you're adopted into the family, and that you've got a place at the table, and he's not going to unson you or disadopt you, because you don't look like your big brother Jesus, because he knows that you're dust, and he knows that, you're not perfect. So there you go. So this is a very, very moving song because, and you're right about the poetry thing, there's just some very, it's so funny. Like, I remember one time I just saw this, because this happens to you. It's called illumination is a theological term. When you'll read something and it's just a regular sort of looking phrase. There was one time when a new Christian, this happened to them, and she got up and, up to the front and shared this passage that I had read for years and years and years. And the way that she was explaining how it hit her, I was like, oh my God, this is, and she was, I think she was 6 months old as a Christian, and she was up there saying some of the most ridiculously deep things I'd ever heard in my entire life. And I've read, you guys know, I've read a bunch of theological tomes or whatever, but what she was saying was some of the deepest, craziest thing I ever heard in my life, and she's only 6 months old. And it's because she had that moment of illumination where she's with God and the words just come off the paper and it means something to you so crazy. Oh, like, for example, one of my favorite phrases in the Old Testament is, as the Lord lives. That's how they would say, I'm telling you the truth. As Yahweh lives, yada, 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 yada. And I remember very distinctly Actually, I was in a teaching capacity at the time, and it was coming to me as I was saying it, because I was talking about how now when we say it as New Testament Christians, it's in the Old Testament it was, we worship a living God, your gods are dead, they're just idols. So as the Lord lives was a way to say that we're worshiping a living God, and the pagans are worshiping a dead God, or a God that cannot act on their behalf. And then it was shown to me that New Testament, yes, that's true, but we also now have this resurrection concept, where our God actually died, but then rose again. So now if a Christian says, as the Lord lives, that has so much more depth to it now. And so that was a thing where I was like, so now every time I see as the Lord lives or whatever, it's like, it's impossible to describe what I feel when I hear that phrase or when I say that phrase. But that's one of those moments where the words, they're just regular words. I mean, I've read over those things, probably hundreds of thousands of times in my reading of the Old Testament. But then when I said that, it completely changed everything as far as how I interpreted that, how I interpreted life, and all the rest of it. So anyway, but it's one of those things where I know for a fact that this sounds completely ridiculous and crazy to people who haven't experienced it. And I'm not even mad at them for it. I understand. It'd be like trying to describe a rainbow to a blind person.
Right.
Oh, really? All these miraculous colors just appear because of water and light and that? Oh, tell us more. You know what I mean? Like, so I get it. When people like look at it and call it ridiculous, like, I don't get mad because I understand. But that probably offends people too. Are you saying that we're blind? I'm saying you're dead. Dead people can't see anything. Okay. Really, really good song. Lyrically, really awesome. Definitely a couple moments with God there. What do you give the song?
It's an 11 for me.
Woo! 9.8 for me. Very, very. This guy's a gifted dude, man. This is the guy that did the. It's not enough. That this guy is a gifted individual. Wallahi, as the Lord lives. Vin out.
Sori out.
Gone.